Captain Lon stood on the command bridge of the Vilebreaker, a sleek surveillance vessel, as it hovered just outside the gravitational pull of Earth. His antennae twitched nervously. For years, he had heard the stories, the warnings about this small blue planet and its native species. Humans were unpredictable, stubborn, and somehow always a step ahead of those who tried to exploit or conquer them. This was Lon's first mission near Earth, and he had no intention of going anywhere near the planet's surface. The Corps avoided humans, and for good reason. "Captain, we've picked up a strange signal," his first officer, Mira, said, her multi-lensed eyes flicking over the data on her screen. "It's coming from the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Could be a distress signal." Lon's 4 hands gripped the railing as he considered their next move. The mission was clear: monitor Earth's space and report any unusual activity. Engaging with humans was not part of the plan, yet curiosity tugged at the back of his mind. The humans were technologically advanced, but not in a way that should concern the Core Empire. At least, that was the official line. "We should investigate," Lon said cautiously, his voice a low growl. "But keep our distance. I don't want us getting pulled into anything." The Vilebreaker moved closer to the planet, its cloaking systems fully engaged. The alien crew watched nervously as they approached Earth, their screens displaying a vast network of satellites and defense systems orbiting the planet. Lon couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest. Naira's voice broke the tension. "Signal's getting stronger. It's human-made, but it's broadcasting on a frequency we've never seen before." Before Lon could respond, alarms blared across the ship. Red lights flashed as the Vilebreaker jolted violently. "We've been detected," one of the navigators shouted, his tentacles flailing across the control panel. "Impossible." Lon barked, but the evidence was clear. The humans had detected them, and now their ship was under attack. "Raise shields. Evasive maneuvers." Lon commanded, but it was too late. The ship lurched again as a series of blasts hit their hull, sending sparks flying across the bridge. "Captain, we're going down," Naira shouted, panic rising in her voice. Lon's heart raced as the Vilebreaker plummeted towards the planet. He had always thought the stories of humans were exaggerated, but now he realized the truth. Earth was a death trap, and they had just fallen into it. The Vilebreaker hit the Earth's surface with a deafening crash, sending a shockwave through the surrounding forest. Smoke billowed from the wreckage as the alien crew scrambled to assess the damage. Captain Lon stumbled out of his seat, clutching his side where his harness had dug into him during the impact. "Report," he growled, forcing himself upright as the pain in his ribs intensified. Nora, limping toward him, glanced at her handheld scanner. "Shields are down, communications offline, engines damaged beyond repair." Lon's antennae twitched. This was far worse than he'd anticipated. They had barely made it to the surface, and now they were stranded. "How long before we can fix it?" Naira hesitated. "Not any time soon, Captain. We need to get the communication systems back online first if we're going to call for help. But there's another problem." "What now?" Lon grunted. "The atmosphere. We didn't have time to adjust for Earth's unique climate during the crash. Our biofilters aren't active, and this air, it's not safe for us to breathe for long without protection." Lon cursed under his breath. They were vulnerable, very vulnerable. He knew Earth was hostile in more ways than one, but being cut off from their ship's systems made survival that much harder. Still, they couldn't stay inside the wreckage for long. The humans would undoubtedly come looking soon, if they weren't already. "We'll need to move quickly. Get the crew suited up and see what we can salvage from the wreck," Lon ordered. He scanned the dense forest around them. It was eerily quiet, and that silence made him uneasy. As the crew began to gather supplies, the sound of rustling caught Lon's attention. His eyes narrowed, and he signaled for the others to stop. From behind the trees, a group of figures emerged, humans. They moved cautiously, weapons in hand, but they didn't fire. Lon raised his arm to signal the crew to stand down. "Hold your fire," he muttered. unsure of how to proceed. These weren't soldiers, but they didn't look like civilians either. Their clothing was rugged, worn from years of hard living. Survivors, no doubt, but of what? The lead human, a tall woman with dark, wind-swept hair, stepped forward. Her piercing blue eyes scanned the wreckage before landing on Lon. She didn't seem surprised to see them, which unsettled him even more. "You're not the first aliens to come here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm guessing you won't be the last. But if you value your lives, you'll turn around and leave while you still can." Lon exchanged a glance with Nira, both of them taken aback by the woman's composure. She wasn't afraid of them, not in the slightest. Instead, it felt as though she was the one offering them mercy. "We don't intend to harm you," Lon said cautiously, stepping forward. "Our ship was attacked, was stranded and need to make repairs." The woman let out a short, humorless laugh. "Attacked, huh? That's what happens when you come too close. Earth has defenses." Lon's brow furrowed. "We didn't expect to be detected. Our technology should have masked us." "Yeah, well, Earth doesn't play by the same rules as other planets. You're not the first ones to learn that the hard way." She glanced back at the others with her, all of them watching silently, guns at the ready. "But I'll tell you this, if you're still here by nightfall, you'll have more to worry about than just us." The warning was clear, and it sent a chill through Lon. These humans weren't openly hostile, but they weren't about to let the aliens stay here uncontested either. "What's coming at night?" Nira asked, her eyes darting nervously toward the darkening sky. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned to the group behind her. "Pack up what you can. We're leaving." Lon felt a surge of frustration. He wasn't used to being dismissed so easily, especially by a species the galaxy viewed as primitive in comparison to the core. But the confidence in the woman's voice, the way she carried herself, suggested that she had survived more than her fair share of conflicts. And if she was warning them about something worse, then maybe it wasn't just idle talk. "You could help us," Lon said, making one last attempt. "We just need to repair our ship and leave. We don't mean you any harm." The woman paused, looking Lon directly in the eyes. The last ones said the same thing. It didn't end well for them. She turned to leave, but then added over her shoulder, "If you want to survive, you'll need to move. Earth doesn't take kindly to intruders." With that, the humans disappeared into the trees, leaving the alien crew in stunned silence. Nora approached Lon. "Captain, what do we do now?" Lon stared after the humans, their words ringing in his ears. Earth was not like other planets, and its inhabitants, while strange, were not their biggest threat. The atmosphere felt heavier now, and the darkening sky seemed to press down on them with an ominous weight. "We move," Lon said finally. "We'll repair what we can, but we won't stay here any longer than we need to." As the crew gathered their tools and supplies, a distant rumble echoed through the forest. It was faint, but unmistakable. Something was coming, and Lon had the distinct feeling that Earth's true dangers were only just beginning. The air grew colder as twilight settled over the forest. Lon and his crew worked swiftly, gathering materials from the wreckage of the viabreaker to assess what could be salvaged. The earlier warning from the humans echoed in Lon's mind, and every instinct told him that time was running out. "Captain, we've got the primary systems stabilized, but communications are still down," Nora reported, her voice tense as she examined the remains of their long-range transmitter. "We're stranded until we can get a signal out." Lon frowned. "How long until we can get it functional again?" Nara hesitated. "At least a full cycle, if we're lucky. But with the tools we've got, it could take longer." A cycle meant an entire Earth day, too long given the growing sense of dread that hung over them. The humans had left without giving many details, but the way they had spoken, it was clear they were bracing for something worse than the crew could imagine. Lon turned to one of the younger crew members, Vec, who had been busy reassembling parts of the ship's engine. "How's the power core looking?" Vec wiped sweat from his brow, his normally pale scales flushed with exertion. "We've got enough energy to power the shields, but only for a short time. Whatever damaged us on the way down took a chunk out of our reserves." Lon let out a slow breath, weighing his options. Staying put felt like a death sentence, but venturing out into the unknown forests of Earth carried its own risks. Either way, the ship wasn't going anywhere unless they could repair it, and that meant they had to buy themselves more time. "We'll activate the shields at nightfall," Lon decided. "It's the only thing keeping us safe until we can figure out what's out there." As the crew continued their work, the forest around them seemed to shift. Shadows stretched longer, the trees swaying in a breeze that none of them could feel. A strange energy hummed in the air, one that set Lon's senses on edge. Then, just as Nira was about to speak again, the ground beneath them trembled. "What was that?" Vec asked, his voice rising with panic. Lon turned toward the horizon, where the sky was darkening rapidly. "Steady," he commanded, though his own heart pounded in his chest. The rumbling grew louder, and the tremors beneath their feet intensified. Suddenly, the forest erupted with movement. Massive trees began to sway violently, their branches thrashing as though caught in a storm, though the air was still. "Captain," Nira shouted, pointing toward the distance. Through the trees, dark shapes moved, large, lumbering creatures unlike anything Lon had seen before. They were as tall as the trees themselves, their bodies covered in thick, rock-like skin, with glowing eyes that flickered in the dim light. "What are those things?" Vec whispered, stepping back in fear. Lon's throat tightened. He had heard rumors of Earth's strange wildlife, but these creatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The humans' warnings made sense now. Earth wasn't just home to humans. The planet itself was alive in ways that no one could have predicted. "Activate the shields, now," Lon barked. The crew scrambled to their stations as the creatures drew closer. They moved slowly, their massive feet pounding the ground, leaving deep impressions in the earth. The shields flickered to life, casting a faint blue glow around the wreckage of the ship just as the creatures neared the perimeter. For a moment, everything was silent. The creatures stopped at the edge of the shield, their glowing eyes fixated on the crew inside. Lon felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. They weren't attacking, but the tension in the air was palpable. "They're waiting," Nira said quietly, her gaze locked on the creatures. "They know we're here." Lon's mind raced. These creatures weren't acting like mindless beasts. There was intelligence behind their movements, a deliberate patience that made his stomach churn. "They're testing us," Lon muttered. "They're waiting for the shield to fail." Vec let out a nervous laugh. "But the shield will hold, right? I mean, we've got enough power to last through the night, don't we?" Lon glanced at Nira, whose expression was grim. "We have enough power for a few hours, not an entire night," she said quietly. "If they don't leave, we're going to run out of energy." The reality of the situation hit them all at once. They were trapped, surrounded by creatures they didn't understand, on a planet that was actively working against them. "We have to do something," Vec said, his voice trembling. "We can't just sit here and wait to be crushed." Lon clenched his jaw. He knew Vec was right, but there were no easy answers. Running was out of the question. The creatures would catch them before they could get far. Fighting wasn't an option either, not without weapons powerful enough to penetrate their rocky hides. "We need to figure out what they want," Lon said. "If they wanted to kill us, they could have already attacked. There's something else at play here." Nara nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the creatures. "Maybe it's the ship. Maybe they're drawn to it somehow." Lon considered the possibility. The crash could have disturbed something in the environment. Perhaps their technology was interfering with the planet's natural systems. "Shut down all non-essential systems," he ordered. "Reduce our energy output and see if that has any effect." The crew moved quickly, powering down everything except the shields and life support. As the hum of the ship quieted, the creatures shifted, their glowing eyes dimming slightly. Lan watched them closely, his mind racing. "It's working," he muttered. "They're reacting to the energy." But just as he thought they had found a solution, the ground trembled again, this time with more intensity. A deep guttural roar echoed through the forest, shaking the very air around them. Lan's heart sank as a new, even larger shape emerged from the trees. Towering over the other creatures was a massive serpentine form, its eyes glowing brighter than the rest. It slithered forward, its body coiled with unimaginable strength. This was no ordinary creature. This was something ancient, something primal. Lan realized with horror that the real threat had just arrived. The ground beneath them shook violently as the massive serpent-like creature loomed over the wrecked ship. Its body twisted around the trees with an eerie grace, its glowing eyes fixated on the alien crew trapped inside the protective shield. Lan's heart pounded in his chest. The smaller creatures had seemed threatening enough, but this was something entirely different. Vex stumbled backward, his face pale. "What is that thing?" Lan couldn't tear his eyes away from the towering serpent. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we can't stay here." The serpent let out a low, rumbling hiss, its body coiling tighter around the trees, snapping branches as though they were nothing. It was clearly more intelligent than the other creatures, its movements were calculated, its focus on the ship unwavering. "We're running out of time," Nura said, her voice strained as she watched the shield's power levels drop on the console. "If the shield goes down, that thing will tear us apart." "We need to move now," Lan ordered. "We can't stay here and wait for it to strike." "But where will we go?" Vec asked, panic lacing his voice. "The forest is full of those things, and we don't even know what direction is safe." Lan's mind raced. They were surrounded by unknown creatures in an environment they didn't understand. But one thing was clear: staying inside the wreckage meant certain death. The serpent was waiting, biding its time until the shield failed. "We're not going to outrun it," Nira said, scanning the dense forest around them. "But maybe we don't have to. If we can distract it, maybe we can get away before it realizes we're gone." Lan's gaze fell on the wreckage of the ship. The remains of the power core were unstable, and he had an idea, a dangerous one. "We need to use the ship's power surge to create a diversion. We'll overload the core, make it think we're still here, and slip away before it attacks." Vec's eyes widened. "You want to blow up the ship?" "It's our only option," Lan said firmly. "That thing is drawn to the energy. If we can trick it into thinking we're still here when the core goes critical, we might have enough time to escape." Nara nodded in agreement. "It's risky, but it could work. We'll need to be quick. The explosion will only buy us a few minutes at best." Lan turned to the rest of the crew. "Gather what supplies you can carry. We leave as soon as the core is set to overload." The crew moved with urgency, gathering weapons, survival gear, and anything that could help them navigate the unfamiliar terrain. Lan and Nira worked together to access the power core, rerouting energy from the shield into the ship's reactor. Sparks flew as the damaged systems struggled to contain the surge of power. "The core is unstable," Nira said, her hands flying over the controls. "We've got 5 minutes, tops, before it blows." Lan nodded. "That's all the time we need. Everyone, fall back into the forest. We'll use the trees for cover." As the crew retreated into the shadows of the forest, the serpent let out another low hiss. Sensing the shift in energy from the ship, it slithered closer, its massive body coiling tighter around the trees, crushing them under its weight. The smaller creatures followed, drawn to the surge of power like moths to a flame. Lan and his crew crouched behind a cluster of thick trees, watching as the serpent circled the ship, its glowing eyes locked on the failing shield. "Wait for it," Lan whispered, his heart pounding in his ears. "Not yet." The shield flickered once, then twice, before collapsing entirely. The serpent lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping at the ship's hull. But just as it struck, the power core detonated with a deafening explosion. A blinding flash of light illuminated the forest as the ship was engulfed in flames, sending debris flying in all directions. The serpent recoiled, letting out an ear-piercing shriek as it was thrown back by the blast. The smaller creatures scattered in all directions, disoriented by the sudden explosion. "Now, move," Lon ordered, leading his crew deeper into the forest. They ran as fast as they could, dodging trees and jumping over fallen branches. The heat from the explosion faded as they put distance between themselves and the wreckage. As they ran, the sound of the serpent's shrieks echoed through the trees. It was still alive, and Lon knew it wouldn't be long before it recovered and came after them. "We need to find shelter," Nera said, her voice breathless. "We can't keep running forever." Lon scanned the dense foliage, his eyes searching for any sign of safety. "There," he said, pointing to a rocky outcrop in the distance. "We'll take cover in those caves. It's the best chance we have." The crew pushed forward, exhaustion beginning to set in as they climbed toward the rocky cliffs. The serpent's cries grew fainter behind them, but Lon knew it was only a matter of time before it tracked them down again. They reached the cave entrance just as darkness fully enveloped the forest. The cave was deep, offering them a temporary reprieve from the dangers outside. As the crew settled inside, Lon finally allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. "That was close," Vex said, collapsing against the cave wall. "I thought we were done for." "We're not out of this yet," Lon said, wiping sweat from his brow. "That creature will be back, and we're still stranded on this planet." Nora nodded. "But at least we've bought ourselves some time. We need to figure out a way to communicate with our fleet, or we'll never get off this rock." Lon leaned against the cave wall, his mind racing. The serpent wasn't just an animal. It was something far more dangerous, and he had the sinking feeling that Earth itself was fighting back against their presence. The humans had warned them, but they hadn't truly understood the gravity of the situation. "Whatever that thing is, it's part of something bigger," Lon said, his voice low. "We're not just fighting creatures, we're fighting the planet itself." The crew fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a heavy fog. Earth wasn't just a dangerous world. It was a living, breathing force that would do anything to protect itself. And they were right in its crosshairs. The cave provided a brief respite from the dangers outside, but the crew knew they couldn't stay there forever. The serpent's distant roars echoed faintly through the forest, a reminder that Earth's predators were still out there, waiting. The air inside the cave was thick with tension, and Captain Lon couldn't help but wonder how long they had before the next threat appeared. As the crew huddled together, Vec broke the silence. "Captain, what are we going to do? We can't stay here, and without communication, no one knows where we are." Lon rubbed his temples, exhaustion beginning to creep in. "We'll think of something, Vec. We have to." Naira, ever the pragmatist, had been staring out of the cave entrance, her gaze fixated on the dark forest beyond. "Captain," she said, her voice unusually quiet, "those humans we met earlier, I think we need their help." The crew exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. "You're suggesting we rely on them?" Vex scoffed. "They barely talked to us, and when they did, it was just to warn us about how dangerous this place is. How do we know they won't betray us?" Lon raised a hand to silence Vec. "No, Nora's right. They know more about this planet than we do. They've survived here long enough to understand its dangers." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "We don't have a choice. We need to find them and form an alliance." The crew murmured in agreement, though the unease was palpable. Trusting humans, beings considered volatile and unpredictable by most alien civilizations, was not an easy decision, especially for Lon, but their survival depended on it. "We should leave at first light," Nera suggested. "Moving at night will only increase our chances of running into more of those things." Lon nodded. "Agreed. Everyone, get some rest. We'll need all our strength for what's coming." The crew settled into an uneasy sleep, though Lon remained awake, his thoughts racing. Earth was unlike any planet he had ever encountered. The humans, the creatures, even the planet itself seemed to possess a strange intelligence. There was no denying that this place was dangerous, but it also held secrets that Lon needed to understand if they were going to survive. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Lon roused the crew. They gathered their equipment, checking their weapons and survival gear. The forest was eerily quiet, as though the dangers of the night had retreated with the darkness. "We head south," Nora said, consulting the map she had downloaded from the ship's database before the crash. "That's where the humans went. If we're lucky, we'll catch up to them." Lon nodded, signaling for the crew to move out. The forest closed in around them as they left the safety of the cave, the dense foliage making it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch set their nerves on edge. They trekked through the forest for hours, the tension growing with each step. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on them, and Lon could feel the crew's fear mounting. Earth wasn't just dangerous, it was alive in a way that no one had anticipated. Suddenly, Nera raised a hand, signaling for the group to stop. "We're not alone," she whispered, her sharp eyes scanning the trees. Lon tensed, gripping his weapon as he listened to the silence. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the same human woman they had encountered the day before. She stood at the edge of a clearing, her arms crossed, a rifle slung over her shoulder. "You're still here," she said, her voice calm but edged with amusement. "I warned you." Lon stepped forward cautiously. "We had no choice. Our ship is gone, and the planet isn't exactly welcoming." The woman raised an eyebrow. "No kidding. You're lucky to still be alive." She glanced at the crew, her gaze lingering on their weapons and gear. "So, what do you want?" "We need your help," Lon said, forcing himself to swallow his pride. "We can't survive here without understanding the planet's defenses. You've been here longer than us. You know how to navigate this world." The woman considered his words for a moment, then let out a sigh. "You're not the first aliens to come here and ask for help. Most don't make it long enough to even ask." She eyed Lon carefully. "But you seem different. You're not here to invade, are you?" "No," Lon said firmly. "We were sent to observe, but after what we've seen, we just want to leave." The woman nodded slowly. "Good, because if you had come here to take anything from this planet, you wouldn't survive another day." She motioned for them to follow her. "Come on. We need to get you somewhere safer before night falls. The real danger comes after dark." The crew hesitated, unsure of whether to trust her, but Lon made the decision for them. "Let's go," he said, leading the way. As they walked, the woman introduced herself. "Name's Elise. I've been on Earth for a long time, longer than most, and I know how this planet works." She glanced at Lon. "You're lucky you didn't run into the more dangerous predators yet." Lon frowned. "More dangerous than the serpent?" Elise gave a small, humorless smile. "Oh, that's just one of many. Earth's ecosystem is adaptive. It learns from intruders, and it responds in kind. The longer you stay, the more the planet will try to get rid of you." Lon's blood ran cold. "You're saying the planet itself is trying to kill us?" Elise nodded. "In a way, yes. Earth is sentient. It doesn't like outsiders, and it has ways of dealing with them." She paused, turning to face Lon. "That's why you need to leave. The longer you stay, the more aggressive it will become. You've already seen the first signs." Lon's mind raced. This explained the strange behavior of the creatures, the serpent's calculated attack, the unnatural tremors in the ground. Earth wasn't just a dangerous planet, it was a living, breathing entity, and it viewed them as invaders. "How do we leave?" Nera asked, her voice strained. "Our ship is destroyed, and we have no way to contact our fleet." Ellis looked at them for a moment, as if weighing her options. "There's a place. An ancient site, deep in the mountains. It's not human-made, but it's powerful. If you can reach it, you might be able to communicate with your people." Lon felt a surge of hope. "Take us there." Ellis nodded. "I'll guide you. But understand this, The journey won't be easy. Earth won't make it easy. Lon straightened his shoulders. We don't have a choice. As they set off toward the mountains, Lon couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The planet had made its first move, and now they were heading deeper into the heart of the storm. Whatever awaited them in the mountains, it would be a test of everything they had. And they would either survive together, or Earth would claim them all. The trek through the dense forest had taken its toll on Lon and his crew. The terrain became increasingly hostile as they moved closer to the mountains, with steep cliffs and thick undergrowth making every step a struggle. Elise led the way with quiet determination, her knowledge of Earth's unpredictable dangers their only lifeline. By the time they reached the base of the mountain, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The air was cool, and the sounds of the forest had changed, becoming more muted, more watchful. Lon could sense it, just as Elise had warned. The planet was aware of them, and it was preparing to strike. We're close, Elise said, glancing back at them as they reached a narrow path that wound up the mountain. The site is just beyond those cliffs. Once we get there, you'll need to activate the ancient technology inside to send a signal to your fleet. It's powerful, but it's not easy to control. Lon nodded, his resolve hardened by the thought of finally leaving Earth behind. We'll make it work. We have to. As they ascended the mountain, the air grew colder and the winds stronger. The path narrowed, forcing them to move single file along the jagged cliffside. Below them, the forest stretched out like a dark sea, with no sign of the creatures that had once pursued them. But Lon knew better than to believe they were safe. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Rocks tumbled down the mountain, and the crew stumbled as the tremor grew stronger. It's starting, Elise muttered, her voice tense. The planet knows we're here. Lon glanced at Nera, whose eyes were wide with alarm. What do you mean starting? Elise looked back at them, her face set in grim determination. Earth is going to throw everything it has at us to stop us from reaching the site. It's not just animals or the weather, it's the planet itself. The ground, the air, the elements, it's all connected. As if on cue, the wind howled with unnatural fury, and the ground shook again, more violently this time. The cliffside path crumbled beneath their feet, and the crew scrambled to hold on as rocks and debris cascaded down the mountainside. Move, Lon shouted, urging his crew forward. They pushed ahead, fighting against the wind and the unstable ground. The rumbling grew louder, and the air crackled with a strange energy. It felt as if the planet itself was alive, twisting and contorting around them, trying to push them back. Just as they neared the top of the cliff, the ground beneath them erupted. Massive roots burst from the earth, twisting and thrashing as they shot toward the sky. The crew scattered, barely avoiding the writhing tendrils that threatened to pull them into the ground. Lon rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding one of the roots as it smashed into the rock where he had just stood. "What is this?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Elise, who had managed to dodge the roots as well, shouted back, "The planet is defending itself. It's not going to let us get to the site without a fight." Lon's mind raced. This was beyond anything he had prepared for. They weren't just fighting creatures, they were fighting the planet's very will. Earth had become a living weapon, and it was determined to stop them at all costs. "We have to keep moving," Nero called out, helping one of the crew members to their feet. "We can't stay here." With no other option, Lon and the crew pressed on, dodging the thrashing roots and debris that rained down from above. The path became steeper and more treacherous, but they refused to stop. The ancient site loomed just ahead, its towering stone structure visible through the swirling dust and wind. When they finally reached the entrance to the site, the ground gave one last violent shake, and the roots retreated, as if the planet was giving them one final warning. Elise approached the stone doorway, her face pale but resolute. "This is it. Once we're inside, you'll have to activate the technology. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know it's old, older than human history. It's alien, but not from your kind or mine. Lon swallowed hard, glancing at the crew. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they had made it this far. They couldn't turn back now. "Let's finish this," he said, stepping forward. Inside the stone structure, the temperature dropped noticeably. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. The air buzzed with an energy that was both ancient and powerful. At the center of the room stood a massive obelisk, covered in the same glowing symbols. Lon could feel the energy radiating from it, pulsing through the ground and the air like a heartbeat. This was the source of the power. "How do we use it?" Nira asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elise stepped forward, placing her hand on one of the symbols. "It's a transmitter. You need to attune it to your fleet's frequency. Once it's activated, it'll send a signal strong enough to reach them, no matter how far away they are." Lon approached the obelisk, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the controls. He had never seen anything like this before. The technology was ancient, far beyond anything the Quor or any other known civilization had developed. But there was no time for hesitation. As he touched the symbols, they flared to life, glowing brighter as the energy surged through the room. The ground trembled beneath their feet, but this time it wasn't an attack. It was the power of the obelisk awakening. "Is it working?" Vec asked, his voice trembling with hope. Lan's eyes were fixed on the symbols as they shifted and rearranged themselves into a familiar pattern. "Yes," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the obelisk. "It's working." The air around them crackled with energy, and a beam of light shot from the top of the obelisk into the sky, piercing through the clouds and disappearing into the atmosphere. The signal was sent. Lan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "We did it." But as the energy from the obelisk stabilized, the ground outside the structure began to shake violently once more. The wind howled, and the roots that had retreated now surged toward the entrance, more aggressive than ever. "We need to leave now," Elise shouted, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. The crew scrambled for the exit, but just as they reached the doorway, the ground split open beneath them. Lan grabbed Nara's arm, pulling her back from the edge as a massive chasm opened up where the entrance had once been. "We're trapped," Vec cried out, his eyes wide with panic. Lan's mind raced, but there was no time to think. The planet was throwing everything it had at them, determined to prevent them from escaping. But they had already sent the signal. Their fleet knew where they were. All they had to do was survive long enough to be rescued. "Elise," Lan shouted, looking to the human for guidance. Elise turned to him, her face set with determination. "There's another way out," she said, motioning toward a narrow tunnel on the far side of the room. "But it's risky." Lan didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice." With the ground shaking beneath them and the roots closing in, the crew sprinted toward the tunnel. The narrow passageway twisted and turned, the walls closing in around them as the mountain itself seemed to groan under the strain of the planet's wrath. Finally, they emerged into the open air, gasping for breath as they collapsed on the rocky plateau outside the mountain. Behind them, the stone structure rumbled and groaned as it crumbled under the weight of the planet's fury. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, in the distance, the sound of ships approaching broke through the stillness. Lan looked up, his heart leaping as he saw the familiar shapes of Quor vessels descending from the sky. "They found us," Nora whispered, her voice filled with relief. Lan let out a shaky breath. "We made it." As the ships landed, the crew was quickly whisked aboard, their injuries tended to by medics. Lan watched from the window as the planet receded below them, the blue-green world both beautiful and terrifying. Elise stood beside him, her arms crossed. "You're lucky, you know. Most who come here never leave." Lan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the planet below. "I won't forget what we saw here." Elise gave him a small, knowing smile. "Neither will the planet." As the ship sped away from Earth, Lan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for the planet and its inhabitants. Earth was more than just a world. It was a living force, one that had protected itself for centuries. And now he understood why no one ever dared to fly near Earth. It was a planet to be feared, and a planet to be respected.